Up here is quarterly data of pass rates for first-time examinees. And that first-time examinee part is important because that handles the problem of, the blend of examinees being different in each cycle. Sometimes you have more repeat examinees, et cetera. Okay, can you still hear me? Okay. Looking at this data, you might think, well, the blue line there for the LPCC clinical exam does in fact show that there's some variability. There's randomness between cycles. But the sample size is quite different. In the third quarter of 2016, and these are calendar quarters, not fiscal quarters, in the third quarter of 2016, just 26 people took that LPCC exam. We're talking about a tiny sample size, one that reasonably does introduce some variability. For MFTs taking the clinical exam, we're looking at about 1,000 first-time test takers each quarter. There should be nowhere near this level of variability. And the issues that Tracy mentioned, things like, it's a new exam, we've got exam prep companies that are sort of scrambling, trying to figure out how to best guide people. Well, that's been true since the beginning of 2016. The issue with people who had taken a previous exam, maybe even seeing some of the same items, that might explain the very high pass rate at the beginning of 2016. It's practice effects, fine. What doesn't make sense here is the tremendous drop-off in pass rates for first-time examinees between the end of 2016 and the first half of 2017. And again, we're talking about 1,000, roughly, first-time examinees per quarter. So I have a number of questions related to this. And the first is simply whether to take this at face value, because from what we've been presented today, the exam is meant to address safety for independent practice, period. So, are we to conclude then from this data that after completing their master's degrees and after completing 3,000 hours of supervised experience, that almost half of first-time examinees on this test still are not prepared to practice independently without being a danger to the public? It's not a rhetorical question, it's a serious question.
I would say yes, they're not passing the exam, and it could be too because they've gotten further in their program, or perhaps they've waited to take the exam. Again, nothing has changed in terms of the development, the references, the subject matter experts, so I would be looking at the candidate pool.
The blend of schools. There are, of course, about 80 MFT degree granting programs in California and many others around the country. The blend of how people come from different programs has not changed dramatically. There might have been sort of a gradual upshift in people who have come in actually under the new stricter curriculum requirements that required 60 units as of the beginning of 2012. I hate to think that maybe those extra units may have made the exam pool dumber. But at face value, you're saying that after all of those requirements on the pathway to licensure, about half the people who complete those requirements still can't practice independently without being a danger to the public. Simply put, that's not plausible. I don't believe that.
Dr. Chu has a question.
I would like to echo what you're saying. My question is it possible for you to run some ANOVA test with all the subgroups? Because you're saying right now, because the candidates are different. But I think you might be able to run statistical analysis based on different schools or different whatever factors you want to do, and run a statistical analysis and see if Ben is correct.
They do run it by schools, by the way. It's in there. It's in the packet. And the schools that serve low-income populations do perform less well than the wealthier schools.
But what I'm saying is, based on that, you can run a statistical analysis and see whether this discrepancy is statistically significant, or whether you can just explain away, like what you're doing now.
We do, again, provide, or the board provides the data by school. We don't have specific demographic information about candidates. We look pretty much at first-time takers versus repeaters. The board has school information. And I just want to reiterate, the passing score right now, or passing rate, is not at 50%. And I would, again, this is helpful data. Again, we're aware of it. We continue to monitor it. But we haven't changed the difficulty of the test. And so that's what we're trying to explain to you. We have not created a situation to make the test harder. And our statistics and patterns are showing that it's starting to go back up again. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful to those who have the master's degree and the supervised hours, but we have a tool that is in place called an exam. We haven't, again, changed the definition of minimum competency, and so therefore, unfortunately, those who are failing are failing. And we have heard some difference in some information about how the prep schools are coaching students that is different than in the past. So even though coaching schools have been around, we have heard that there is some information given to them that is unsettling in terms of how to approach test questions. That could be a direct impact on how they take the test as well.
Well, sure, but that doesn't explain the suddenness and significance of the drop. A pass rate that's, I believe the most recent quarter there is 56% for first-time test takers is baffling because it does suggest that up to almost half, 44% of the people who have completed all the requirements can't practice independently without being a danger to the public.
So again, when we see these, red flags go off. I mean, we watch this exam weekly, if not sometimes daily. Again, looking at those test questions and trying to determine if there's something going on that's resulting in this. And again, our data has not showed that. We can't go, ooh, we're going to get in trouble at the board meeting. We better adjust this pass score. We don't have any justification for that. Again, if there were items or subject matter experts are saying you're way off, this shouldn't be on the test, or again, a wrong item that's keyed incorrectly, yeah, we would make those adjustments. We're just not getting that data. Our data is telling us that the test is performing as it should be, and that there must be a dynamic with the pool of candidates that could be affecting it.
This is not a test performing as it should be.
I still don't understand the argument, because based on statistics, okay, we have the dependent variable, that's the passing rate, and then we have all kind of independent variables. And you can certainly run statistical analysis and see if this is just a fluke or there's nothing to do with anything else, and that's what you're saying. But short of doing such a statistical analysis, I don't see how you can say that, whether it just happened by chance.
Okay. Do you have some variables you would like us to correlate besides the schools?
Yeah, besides the schools, and whatever you can think of, the numbers.
So we don't have other variables, is what I'm trying to say. So if you have specific variables, we can see if the board has that information. But we don't collect examinee data. In fact, we are prevented, wherever our legal is, from collecting certain demographic data.
But at least from what we know, based on schools, we can certainly still run statistical analysis.
Well, the things that I think that play into this may not be necessarily the schools, but the candidate themselves. How long have they been registered? We have some folks still in the cycle that have probably been registered for 12 plus years. And so when I think about that, they are 12 probably 15 years out of school. So there has been a change in the education. And if they have not kept abreast of that, that's going to impact their ability to pass this test. I'd also like to point out we had some recent data that we left on the back table. But if we look at how that exam is performing since the first of the year, and keep in mind that we're in the second year of the change to the exam cycle. For the first time, test takers in January 2017, we had 60% passing. It dropped to 56% in February and March. We had a low of 51% in April. Now we're trending up in May. It's 56%, and at the end of June, we are back up to 60%. In prior administrations of before we shifted everything, I think our pass rate, and we can go back and look, but I don't think it approached 70% pass rate at all. It hovered in the 60s.
That's sometimes it did approach 70%, but that's
Yeah.
including both first-time test takers
Right.
and repeat examinees.
Right.
Cleaner data comes from just looking at first-time test takers,
Right.
which was routinely between 70 and 80%.
Right. And that's happening now with the law and ethics. And I expect that to hover right around there because the bulk of the candidates that are going to be coming through are recent grads. And so they're, for law and ethics, it's more of a recall rather than I really need to have some more critical thinking skills applied here. So, and I can share with you, having gone to 2 association meetings recently, they prepare their exam in the very same fashion that we do. And it's one of the reasons Oregon has adopted our exam, MFT exam, and it's one of the reasons that the AMFTRB Association is proposing that all states adopt California's exam. But our occupational analysis is only based on California practice. The other 2 exams, it's nationwide. So you are going to see some higher pass rates on those clinical exams. So, I mean, I hear the concern, Ben, and I think the only added, information that we could even provide in comparison would be to look at the number of years the individual has been registered with the board as a first-time taker of that clinical exam, and that might tell us a little bit more about what's going on.
That would be interesting data, and it would tell us something about potential changes in the exam pool.
Yeah.
I appreciate a couple of things about what you're saying. One is when you look at that month-to-month data, of course it's natural to expect some month-to-month fluctuation. You're getting
Right.
different cohorts, and significantly, you're getting smaller sample sizes. We would expect that doing data quarterly like this or by exam cycle would actually smooth out some of that month-to-month variability. So the steepness of this drop from one quarter to the next is particularly alarming, and then for it to stay as low as it has for 2 quarters is alarming.
Right.
Also, given the large sample size per quarters, it's possible, but it seems quite unlikely that we're seeing such a major change in cohort in terms of how long people have been registered before taking the exam, that it would account for this significant of a change. I mean, at the end of the day, there are really only 2 plausible explanations for a change like this with as large of a sample size we have. One is that something major did shift in the cohort, in the people taking the exam. I don't think we've heard anything today that supports that conclusion. If anything, the number of schools and the number of examinees that we're talking about should smooth out variability from one school to the next, in terms of how long somebody's been registered, that kind of thing. The other conclusion is that there is something wrong with the test. And I understand what you're saying about we get this data back all the time, we look at it a lot. The fact that this apparently has been flagged and is reviewed a lot and still has been here for 6 months now is gravely concerning to us. And I appreciate, Kim, that based on your work, you have faith in the integrity of the exam. I got to tell you, based on this data and based on what we've heard today, I don't. I mean, it's concerning enough just philosophically that with passing scores sort of hovering in the 65-70% range, that somebody could get every single legal and ethical question on the clinical exam wrong and still be declared safe enough to practice independently if they get all the questions about middle stage interventions in Bowen therapy correct. there's some logic problem there in and of itself. But to say that almost half of our population does a 60-unit degree, and some of these folks would have done 48, but completes their master's degree, gets through all their supervision, does a test prep course in many cases, and still isn't safe enough to practice independently, barring some other explanation, the most parsimonious explanation is that what we have seen are significant problems in the last 2 cycles of this exam. I haven't yet heard anything today that would lead me to a different conclusion.
What I can do is we can work with OPES, look at some of the candidates that are coming through, because we know who's testing, and then we can in turn tell you how long that they've been registered. And I think that that's going to provide us some interesting information. And because we've shifted in the way we've done our test in terms of how the sequencing is going, most of the law and ethics is in that first exam. Now you're getting into the blending of the clinical vignette, which, as you recall, probably was not, I mean, that had a reasonably low pass rate anyway. So now you're blending that into the more higher functioning questions after you've had your registration for a while. So you're blending those 2 exams. I would not be surprised to see, frankly, just knowing the population that we talk to and the struggles we hear about the exam, I am not going to be highly surprised to find out that it's the folks that have been registered with us for more than 6 years are the ones that are really struggling with the clinical exam, and that could account for a large drop-off. I don't think the folks that are getting out of school, getting their supervised hours within that first 6 years and testing, I don't think those are the folks that are struggling. I think it's the folks that have made a career of being a registrant.
I appreciate your point. It seems unlikely, and I'll wait to see the numbers.
Yeah.
It seems unlikely that there are enough of those folks, and maybe more to the point that there's been enough of a change in the proportion of those folks that would account for this much of a drop-off. Right. And my intention here is not to cast aspersions. People's jobs and promotions and careers sort of hang in the balance. And when you see this kind of a drop-off, you've got hundreds of people, again, about 1,000 per quarter. You've got hundreds of people who are failing by 1 or 2 points. And I have to wonder if it's not the case for a lot of those people that if they simply had had the good fortune to test a couple of cycles earlier or a couple of cycles later, would they get that job or that promotion that they are waiting for? When right now they can't or they didn't. Those are the people I'm really worried about here, who I think are caught up in a deeply flawed process.